Eric.
Omar.
This feels like a homecoming episode, a foundational iron culture episode.
It feels like home to me.
Now, home can potentially be a scary place because we're joined, and I said this before, I don't want to speak for my man, the co-host, the main hunk himself, Eric Helms, but they're not my children. I can play favorites when it comes to guests. And Mike T is one of my favorite guests on Iron Culture. We had to look this up before we began this episode, and Mike was on a roundtable about periodization with Dr. Zordos, John Kiley, himself. It was episode 4. It is a foundational episode. We've been referencing Mike T, as I'm sure you've heard, since that point in time where Mike gave one of just the best metaphors as it relates to training, having a plan, a program, what it's like. Eric, to the best of your ability, because it is foundational to Iron Culture, I want you to catch everyone up to speed. Can you relay essentially what Mike T said in that episode and why it really struck to the core of Iron Culture? For those who are unaware, let me explain just before, because it's now over 5 years ago, how I hoodwinked Eric in order to join me in this podcast initially was re-traumatizing him. There was this episode, it's one of the ones where we recounted this, but I'll give a brief synopsis of what occurred. Hereditary. I knew the film would have been perfect just to traumatize Eric. Showed it to him. He called me at midnight after, had to talk it through, what's going on, man? This thing's heavy. We decided to do the podcast. I said, there's only one way to salvation, and that's bigger biceps. And he said, we're in. I also said we should go to counseling. I said, couple counseling is cheaper. Don't pay attention to that name couple. It just means it's more than one person. Anyways, we had a conversation, decided to do the podcast. It's been 5 years, been fantastic ever since. And then we got hit with kind of an existential question, Eric, not 100 episodes in, not 200 episodes in. Mike T hit us with something in episode 4 that quite frankly rocked the both of us. Eric, take it away.
Yeah. I would say, what started with you just inserting yourself as my personal Jesus to me losing the just world fallacy that I had by watching Hereditary became a existential dread that Mike T gave to us unbeknownst to our expectations on a simple periodization roundtable that not only rocked me to the core again, bringing me back from couples counseling, but even took you out, which is what led us to draperism. Thank God, as the only way that we could maintain our belief in something positive and not just being chased around by Paimon in a cave that constantly shifts with only a penlight. So Mike T specifically brought up an analogy, a frightening analogy, that training is a constantly evolving, shifting thing. You're not even the same lifter you were before. Not just that there's individual responses, but that you're not even the same individual on a week-to-week, month-to-month, or year-to-year time scale. And if you dig enough into the actual biology, that's true. Every 6 months, I think your body is almost completely replaced. Are you even you now? And that's what he tried to solve with emerging strategies. And essentially what we have is your program is a penlight.
Penlight.
No, it's not a flashlight. It's
not a flashlight.
Penlight.
Thank you, Eric.
No. Yeah, and you're in a cave, which that's scary already, right? But the cave is like this nanite cave that constantly shifts and changes. The tunnels are not the same spot. And, sometimes you get hurt in the cave. And Mike is one who has been hurt in the cave, but he's still in there. He's still got his penlight, and he's finding a way forward despite the ever-shifting nature. And the question each time he sees himself reflected in an icy stalactite of, is that even me I'm looking at anymore? Even though I remember being Mike T, 6 months ago, that was an entirely different physical body. My training must evolve, I must evolve, and all I have is this penlight, and the cave is shifting. So Omar and I literally peed in our pants, in unison, to show you that we're...
Yeah, if I want to...
Okay, well, maybe we're not as united as we thought, and that's just because, I was starting contest prep. I was about 6 weeks deep, a little mildly constipated, but I definitely 2 days later had a bowel movement I did not enjoy. So with a slight delay, we were united. So welcome back for probably the fifth or sixth time. We can't keep track. Mike T.
Thanks, guys. I'll see if I can come up with something equally frightening to relay to you. The sun's going to explode one day, and we'll relate that to training somehow.
Hey, Mike, my man, that is billions of years from now. What I loved about what Mike did, Eric, he was so nonchalant about it, so comfortable in the cave. So that's the difference. We were confronted with an existential dread. Mike was in that cave thriving. He gave a scenario. You can listen back to episode 4, but that's why Mike T is Mike T. And we said at the beginning of this episode, he's been a foundational member as it relates to powerlifting methodologies, as it relates to just having notable lifters in the space from over a decade ago. I remember watching Mike. I think the first video, I mentioned this a few times, Mike. I think it was in a super training video. So it's over a decade old, right? So you've been in the game for a long period of time. Competing at a very high level, being a coach at a very high level, giving these examples that may or may not cause terror in people that are listening. And now you're back today to talk about your journey and what a journey it's been. You're going to explain this. We're going to get all into this, but it wouldn't be Iron Culture. And this, Eric, this is very warranted for you to do this time, absolutely, because Mike is too humble. This is one of Mike's problems. Okay, I'm gonna out you, my friend. He's a humble dude. Okay, he's one of those gentle giants, like 6 feet, sure, but he's thick. And he has like a soft-spoken, and he means business when he trains. But if you ask him to, recite his own accomplishments, I feel like he would miss some of the very key details. So just to catch everyone once again up to speed, because we have new listeners, we have Trextopia that has joined, Iron Culture. Eric, do your best to summarize Mike T, like kind of his accomplishments, which will catch us up to speed, Mike, in terms of your recent competition, totaling 900 kilograms, okay, and it's a 1984 in pounds. Point one, lost out on body weight to podium, once again, in 120 kg class. Phenomenal stuff. But Eric, please, catch everyone up. Who is Mike T?
So I think we need to frame just how much powerlifting has advanced in recent years. Okay? So if we were to think about what totals would be winning most weight classes in, say, 2010 compared to now in 2024, there are some years where we would literally have to go up 2 weight classes back in 2010 at Worlds to have an accurate representation of what is considered elite and a world champion today. What this has resulted in is that many of us who thought we were decent athletes back in the day have realized that all the decent athletes decided powerlifting is not a place for decent athletes. I'm going to do a real sport. But today, believe it or not, people have decided, who are decent athletes, to compete in powerlifting, relegating most of us far outside of our own delusional mindset of how good we were. Case in point, the Arnold, an invitational meet where you used to have to apply and you could only get in with a certain coefficient score, back in the day it was the Wilks score, required a 375 Wilks to apply back in the day. And I thought, I'm almost there, let me get it. The next year, as powerlifting expanded, I think this is 2012, it went up to 400, and I was only a couple Wilks points away. I then hit the 400 Wilks, and it went up to 435. And this trend continued such that the rate of improvement of Eric Helms was far less than the rate of improvement of the overall sport. Now, you might think someone who started competing like Mike T way back in the day, as early as his first competition in 2003, would probably be victim to the same issue. But no. Mike T, he won the Junior Powerlifting World Championships as the first time I believe in Bulgaria in 2006. So this is the same year I did my first competition. He just became a junior world champ. This is before the raw era of IPF powerlifting. So he was single-ply junior world champ, and he went on to keep competing, keep kicking ass. I think in his first appearance at World Powerlifting Championships in the Open, he placed second. He was one of the folks who was invited to Raw Unity multiple times and competed there, which you've talked about, Omar, which is kind of the first Raw explosion, which was outside of the IPF, where it was untested, tested, competing against each other. And this is a guy who is doing very well, placing second in Raw Unity, despite the fact that He is an IPF lifter. He's a tested athlete. And then when the classic explosion happened, Mike T continues. But before we even get to that, I want to point out that he is a World Games gold medalist. And that is it is the highest prestige you can have in terms of a competitive outcome in the IPF. The World Games is the equivalent of the Olympics for the powerlifter. And he competed in the 2009 World Games in Taiwan. And he won in the heavyweight class. They combined basically, I think, the 120 and 120 plus into one category. Back then, it was actually different weight classes. But anyway, he came away at the age of 24 with a gold in the World Games. And since then, he has gone on to win, I want to say, 4 national titles in the U.S., Mike. Does that sound right? In the classic division?
Close, I think.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
This is why Eric needs to explain this, Mike. We want to make sure we get all your accomplishments.
Man,
Yeah.
I'm terrible at remembering my own stats even.
Well, no, hey, so basically, Mike stayed competitive through the boom that we had in the mid-teens, doing quite well, continuing to represent folks at Worlds. I think 2014 Nationals and what was probably your last national title, if I recall correctly. And that was kind of the point where we were starting to see what we thought was the peak Mike T, but we may be coming back to was in that teens era. And this is the second episode kind of celebrating his return to the sport, even though the time spent away was not ever that long. And of course, his influence goes far beyond just being a lifter. He's the person who inspired my PhD topic of investigating RPE, inspired much of the research that Dr. Zerdos has done. And his methods are universally used throughout IPF powerlifting and powerlifting more broadly of taking an autoregulatory reactive approach, if you will. He started Reactive Training Systems. He wrote the Reactive Training Manual in 2008, and he created the conception of what autoregulation is, which has evolved over time, as it should, as a way of systematically individualizing approaches for lifters, from emerging strategies to different methods of assessing recovery and stress balance. And he has been a forefront thinker and communicator as to the programming methods. And you will hear many modern lifters discuss how they learned to program through many of the RTS classrooms. And I would also credit myself as someone who took a tremendous amount of learning from him. But you'll hear folks like Panna, right now, France is killing it, talk about that. And there's almost no one in the coaching game who isn't fully aware of Mike T. But let's just not forget that the man is still doing the damn thing. There's very few lifters from that era who have been in the game this long, who are now approaching 40, who are still kicking ass. And he just came off of PA Nats, totaling for the first time, I want to say, in maybe a decade, Mike, over 900 kilos.
Yep.
In the 120 class, and just narrowly missing the podium at PA Nats in a stacked division, because guess what, folks? All the top level lifters from the USAPL, or nearly all of them, are coming back to PA, and Mike is right there in the mix. Like I said, only missing the podium spot by bodyweight. And now I believe you're only 3 weeks out from your first equipped meet in 14 years. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yeah. Yeah. After PA Nationals, I'm looking at the calendar, and I've talked to you guys both about moving the family later this summer and, what can I do? What competitions are available to me? And just due to a lot of timing, there wasn't a lot, but equipped competitions lined up pretty well. And I thought, that seems interesting. It's been such a long time. Let me dust off the squat suit, the bench shirt, and see if it's any fun. And it was really fun. I started out equipped, and I'm kind of familiar with, you mentioned I jumped onto the classic raw powerlifting pretty much as soon as it was available. It was always my primary interest. And I'm familiar with all the arguments that people have over stuff like this, right? It's supposed to be a contest of strength and things like that. But if you think of it just as a sporting event in itself, and don't get too hung up on like what qualities is this comparing between individuals. There's just a lot of other things going on there. When people talk about the technical precision that's required for equipment, and it's that, but there's something about it that there's a different athletic quality, that you have to be patient in different ways and think about what you're doing a lot more than I feel like raw powerlifting has to do. Well, maybe you can stop me if I'm going too quickly in a weird direction here, but I think that when I write training for equipped powerlifters, I give them more space to just do athlete stuff. It's like, well, here's your spot in the week for you to practice in your bench shirt. I vaguely want this kind of thing, like vaguely this many singles around this much weight, but they have a lot of latitude to just be an athlete. Like, our objective here is for you to learn more about your bench shirt, to figure out how much can we get a touch with a little bit lighter weight this week or something along those lines. And they have freedom to solve movement problems, which is what an athlete should do. And that's not for everybody, but if you get to a spot where a little shakeup to training is appealing, then that can be pretty fun. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love it. The beauty of Iron Culture is that for every tangent that someone might want to take, there's a bunch of listeners who are like, oh, I wish you'd please go down on that tangent. If that's you, dear listener, we're going to do another episode callback. Check out episode 46, where we had equipped versus raw lifting with Bryce Krawczyk, Natalie Hansen. By the way, that's a Canadian national champion, international world level competitor, and the other Bryce, as we call him, because Bryce Lewis is, of course, the real Bryce. Sorry, Canadian Bryce. No, just kidding. I love Bryce Krawczyk. Natalie Hansen, whipped world champ, fantastic coach, and also good friend of mine and the show. And of course, who else but Mike T. Great roundtable. Go back, check out that one, episode 46. We're digging in the crates in this one, folks. No, I think that's great insight. And I think if anyone's ever not been exposed to equip lifting, it is a very different training experience just watching it. Having never done it myself, just watching someone have to have a pit crew around them to get in and out of their bench shirt and think about which exercises are going to transfer. It's a very different animal. And some of the things that people have been confused about from the raw powerlifting perspective for a long time, like benching with your lats, focusing a lot on tricep work, some of those things come from an equipped era that is just not as prominent today and is relatively misunderstood. So I think it's cool. And one thing that is very appealing to me that maybe one day I'll try it, but I haven't, when I talk to equipped lifters, is that so much is involved in the interaction between the gear and the lifter, that there's a skill. It almost reminds me a bit of, say, how a race car driver describes feeling it. And that's still a sport. Like obviously it's not the same. Like, it's not Fred Flintstone race car driving where you're actually propelling it, which is maybe a little closer to equip lifting. You're obviously still heavily dependent upon strength. And it's not like I could figure out my gear to the point where, oh, look, Mike T only barely edged out Eric Helms in this recent equip lift because he's so good at figuring out his gear. Like, I'm not going to double my squat, folks. It's not going to happen. So anyway, I think that's really insightful. And I think there is an appeal to a lot of people, the idea of adding another variable, ultimately, to powerlifting. And I think it's really something intriguing and something I've grown to appreciate a little more as I've talked to equip lifters.
No, Mike, I was going to say, to echo Eric, I will say briefly, Eric, you've never tried any equip lifting whatsoever?
The closest I've done is I used to compete in a federation with RAPS, and
yes.
So that's part of the experience. Is basically doing BFR on the platform and waiting and being like, I cannot feel my feet and my adrenaline is going, largely because I'm worried about falling down with 500 pounds on my back, not because I'm actually ready to squat. But I'm from what I've heard, also being sucked up into a squat suit and bench shirt is even more than that.
So I will just say, and then we will move on. That's kind of my trepidation behind equipped lifting. One, I've really started to enjoy. I train Mike in my backyard in my garage, and I like just being able to set the time. So I do find I thrive when I train alone. So getting used to training with a crew would be something. But Eric, to your point, the one thing that really gives me a pause is just the blood pressure, man. Like I put on one time a bench shirt, and already I describe it as my face feels like it's exploding when I'm just squatting on a regular basis. And when I put on, Mike, the bench shirt, I'm sure you'll acclimate over time. So there's an adaptation period like anything else. But just to say it did not feel good. Like I actually remember Mark Bell said this about equip lifting back during the super training days, where he said it feels like your body's getting crushed. And then he said, I feel like everyone should experience this to know what powerlifting feels like, or this style that is just a whole other dimension. So kudos to you is what I want to say. And I think that reveals just a character trait about you that we both respect, which is like an openness, right? It's like a willingness to either try things or revisit things, reconsider certain concepts. And what we're hearing from what you just described, okay, so you just did, fantastic at PA Nationals, and now you're going to be doing an equipped meet, is what kind of keeps, Mike, for you, this spark alive, where I sense in your voice and in your description of things, there's like a genuine enthusiasm when approaching training. What is it? Was it like the outcome, man, that you just experienced? What has stoked the fire for so long for you where you could decide to wrap yourself up back in a suit, as Eric and myself just said, okay, we're back in the cave. You're pounding your chest in that cave. You got the penlight. You're surging forward. Eric and myself are just figuring out the easiest ways to go out, honestly. Like at that point, we're like, I don't know, man. I don't know if this is for us. But now you're putting yourself in a suit. And as we just said, it's not comfortable. So my first question for you, Mike, what's keeping this spark alive? Because I kind of feel that's an integral component towards the success. Not, you need to love lifting, but there's an enthusiasm there. I'm definitely sensing that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, it's several different things. And I've come to realize that I am searching for it and kind of allowing it to change as we go. And Eric, like as I talk to you over time, I sense something similar in you, and probably in you as well, or that this is something that I like and I want to keep liking it. So I'm looking for things that seem cool and that seem motivating, and it's okay if that changes. Like I know that someday you lift your last PR, but I don't think I'm there yet. So that can still be part of the equation, and it is part of the equation. But like I mentioned, this year, it looks like scheduling wise, maybe nothing that's interesting that I'm qualified to do is just lining up with my schedule. So what else is out there? I honestly considered grabbing a membership to a local strongman gym to see if hey, maybe dabbling in strongman might be fun. But the equipped side of things kind of just lined up a little bit better. And it's been fun. But I still want to find those things. And I think people change their mind over time, that I think for lots of, especially younger guys, that, the master's division has no appeal, maybe until you're masters. And then things look a little different from that vantage point, right? Like as the years go by, your perspective changes, or it should change if you're growing as a person,
I totally relate to that. And I think there's a number of different ways to think about this. Like, if you're smart and if you, I've heard people talk about this who are maybe just a little younger than us, and they're still pretty clearly on the rise. They haven't had any major injuries, but they are getting to the point where they're clearly not in their steepest, let's say, slope of their progress, where they're talking about being able to hit PRs for a long time, and then not necessarily having anything else to say after that. And these people also talk a good game around just focusing on the external rewards is not enough. You can't control who wins, but you can just control being your best. And unfortunately, even that runs out. Like, time does eventually win all competitions. And I think for those who are willing to face the existential crisis of hitting your last PR, or maybe being physically unable to simply do what you love, maybe not even due to a major injury, but just because that sometimes happens too. Like, it's just too painful. My shoulders are too banged up. I can't do X, Y, and Z. I've very intentionally thought about that. And the response was, all right, I need to allow my motivation to change and shift and evolve and grow, like you said. But I'm also going to be like, I want to keep liking this. So this is an intentional thing. So when I do a lateral shift, when I try strongman, when I try weightlifting, when I focus on bodybuilding, I'm chasing that motivation that's going to keep me performing at my best and finding new ways to feel engaged, and redefining what it means to be Eric as a lifter. And I think if you're a little too passive in that process, it can result in, like, if you're still open to what your motivations might change to, that's great. But I won't say that this will happen. My fear is that if I don't direct that in some way but I want to stay lifting, that it could shift to something else. And I know with my very, very, very one-track mind that it might be to the exclusion of lifting if I'm not someone who's intentionally trying to stay a lifter. And I want to keep liking it, just like you said. And I think that's a really good framing. And I think, to me, that also is another analogy I use, is that is framing it as a relationship. And successful marriages, I can tell you, as someone who's been reasonably successful, we've been together, my wife and I, for 19 years, married for 18, is intentional. It's not just kind of the way people fall in love. That's a passive thing. We fell in love, saw her and boom, and that's a beautiful thing. And I did fall in love with my wife, and it was very easy when we first met. But long-term relationships, you can't rest on that, because both people evolve, and the actual neurobiology changes over time with someone, and you have to decide, no, this is a great partnership. I love this person. I want to stay with them, and we need to find a way to grow together. And I think that's the same framing that I use when I think about lifting, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. You may even know the actual study that I'm going to attempt to recall, but it's pretty well known in motivation circles about the children who are drawing. Some of the children will then provide an external reward, and how much do they draw? And then when the external reward is taken away, they draw less than their baseline amount, that type of thing. And then children who are, not provided that external reward, kind of keep it on. I was familiar with that idea, but it definitely struck me this year at Nationals. I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing this, I'm experiencing this phenomenon, to go from somebody who showed up and was winning Nationals consistently, and then for that to not be on the table. It's like, I'm not beating Bob Matthews, I'm not this time out, but it's a different motivation, and then I think about my other roles. I'm here also as a coach as well as an athlete, and, competing demands, and should I be focusing more on one thing, another thing? There's different ways of rationalizing it, and I'm thinking, if I'm just here going for PRs, should I be focusing on something else? I could go for PRs at a local competition, So those thoughts are definitely going through my head, and it was an intentional effort to think about, what other value am I getting from this experience? Before, it was completely obvious and undeniable. And then when that changes, it's not that you can't change with it, but it definitely takes intentional effort, like you're saying.
Yeah. No, it's very well said. And for Kai and for the listeners who do like to dig into the research, because we have many of those who would love a tangent on this topic. Lepper and colleagues, 1973, undermining children's intrinsic interest with extrinsic rewards, a test of the overjustification hypothesis. Again, 73, over 50 years old, and replicated many times and explored in more depth and with some specific fitness-related stuff in adults. In 2012, Fishbach and Choi, fantastic paper that I'd encourage everyone to read. When thinking about goals undermines goal pursuit, which is a very related topic where focusing on the outcome versus the process can sometimes subvert one's intrinsic motivation with extrinsic goals that are less in control, less in your power. So here's the interesting thing, Mike, and I'm going to make this about me, which is what Iron Culture is really about. We start with Iron Culture explaining your history, and then we invite you on, say how amazing you are, and then we go, so let me tell you about me. Yeah, exactly. I got to the point where I felt so solid in my connection to lifting as a thing and who I am. And I can't even imagine not being an Eric who says, yeah, and I lift. I think if I got in a terrible car accident, I would compete in curling or bench only, or I would find some way to do something because it's still such a huge part of my life. And only if I was physically incapable of doing anything that could even be in the realm of my mind of lifting would I really struggle with a sense of self. That's how connected to the intrinsic side of it I am. Where now, because I, unlike you, was not winning junior world titles, I am starting to get to a phase where the extrinsic reward is actually there in bodybuilding, where I can pretend to be strong because I look strong-ish, but I'm not actually strong. I'm chasing some of the extrinsic for the first time, and I don't feel it's a threat to the intrinsic. So it's almost this inversion where you early on, you had early success like many athletes do. You got attached to that. You then had an injury, and you had a lot of these threats to your intrinsic drive, but clearly you wouldn't have gotten into powerlifting at such a young age. You wouldn't have thought about it so much. You tell me stories of, you and your brother training as teenagers with old leader set, that type of thing. So this is something that has been a part of the DNA of Mike for a long time, but you face threats, both injury as well as chasing the outcome rather than focusing on the process or your love for it. And now you've come back to it. For me, because I was not good, the order was reversed. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, is that for someone who maybe is a late peaker, like myself, who's now coming into my own and being pretty successful from an extrinsic perspective in bodybuilding, I guess I have the privilege of, while I don't have a world title underneath my belt, and maybe I would trade it for that, I do now feel like I can, with abandon, pursue extrinsic outcomes. So it's interesting how two very different athletic arcs end in a very similar place, but at different times, and eventually with a shared similar perspective. And I just find that fascinating, because it tells me that ultimately every lifter has to eventually get comfortable with reality and the limitations of life, and then finding a way to still exert effort, strive against the iron, get those benefits, and find meaning from lifting. So I think it's a really fascinating discussion, and it's really great to see someone like yourself still bringing that same level of passion. And it's something that Jeff Alberts has echoed, in this last contest prep, which ended in him being the oldest competitor by over a decade in the open lightweight division and placing 5th out of 16, the highest placing American at WBF Worlds. He actually didn't know what his motivation was for that season, but he said, you know what? Each day when I go out on this long walk for my cardio, I'm going to try to find it. And it's the same idea. Like, I'm not done yet. This is who I am. It's what I do. Is the relationship the same for me? No. Am I towards the end? Might this be my last peak? Possibly. But I'm going to go out there and figure it out, because that's still, who I am. And this takes shape. It looks different for a lot of different people, but I think for those who do stick with the iron for the long term, this is kind of that path they have to walk one way or another.
Yeah. And to throw back to the cave analogy, or draw another analogy to the cave analogy, it's different for everybody. You're talking about how your arc is different you're going to come against these issues and you've got to problem solve that for yourself. Being familiar with the field of possible solutions is going to be helpful, but ultimately kind of figuring out what we're doing here is something that you've got to do along the way.
Mike, we got to get into this, man, because this episode already, first 10 minutes, it's been a monster episode, Eric. But I want to ask first Mike this question. So jokingly, Mike, I'm going to say, what the hell took you so long, man, from 2014 now to 2024 Nationals? But I want you to try and describe to the listener, because we have a wide variety of different ages that listen to Iron culture, what becomes more difficult over time? Because here's the hot take, and I really want to hear what Mike has to say, and then Eric as well, that once you get past the age of 30, this is like just the general rule, like, things get tougher, your body gets more worn down. But my hot take, I kind of feel, and I want to hear this from Mike, someone who has his own coaching company, who is very committed to his family. Like these are serious time constraints, emotional investments that one has. Shout out Brian Whitaker with one of the best also things that he said, I think, in Iron culture that we've had, where he said he's trying to maximize given the constraints. But I personally feel that one of the more difficult aspects as one gets older, and it's not just simply a biological number, it's a responsibility factor that usually is coupled with age. And so it's less the physical durability going down, which does happen over time. And it's more like, Mike, you have 4 children, you have this business, you have this house, you're moving, you just said you're moving. And so and because you have to be there, you have all these commitments, you have to pick, a meet that you're doing that's around that. And I think people truly don't understand that aspect. And that's why I find it especially impressive. I don't think it's just the biological consideration, especially we're talking like, Mike, you're 38. I think you still have like your peak is here. You could still keep training, still make PRs, all those sorts of things. So that biological limit isn't there. But it's all the other life aspects that I think that just get more enhanced over time. But I want to hear this from you, man. What has gotten more difficult? Like, what is it from 2014? So you had an injury, a setback. You've discussed that. You could discuss it in this episode if you want. But what has gotten more difficult over time, or what's made this special? Because the greater the adversity leads to the greater triumph should one overcome it, and that's what happened with you. So I'm curious, like, what did you manage to unlock, man?
The injury that I suffered was, we call it a back injury. Things are never super clear and concrete, but that gives us a thing to call it. That's probably the biggest hurdle to competing and to training how I want and things like that. And it hasn't like fully gone away. It's not like I'm back to training how I did in my late 20s or anything. But I've found ways to continue progressing outside of that. But before I go too far down that road, I should say, just acknowledging the unique life circumstances that I'm benefiting from here. If I wasn't able to make training part of my workday, it would be real tough. Like, I don't think I would be competing. I would probably be, doing my best with some extremely limited time frames and, lower frequencies. And I would be making a lot of sacrifices because of these other things going on in my life. And I see other people who don't have that benefit, who are still being just as committed to their goals, and whether that's competing or not competing, they're being as committed as I am, but without the benefit of just like being able to roll this into my work day and take like a 2.5 hour training session in the middle of the day, or something like that. I think that's super cool when I see people who are that committed to it. So that's been a big assistance for me. But in terms of challenges, I would say getting past it's anytime you have like a long-term injury like this, it's never really like gone. It's not like I said this or the last time we talked about this, like, you never go back to the way things were. You only keep going forward. And that may resemble a little bit more or a little bit less how things were, but you're never going back. And to just kind of accept that and keep moving forward has been a big help. And it's helped continue to overcome the problems when they kind of pop their head up again. So like I said, for me, it was a back injury, started around that time frame, 2014. By 2016, it was, kind of undeniable, and I needed to take a break from competition. And I did. And, you guys were really helpful to me in helping me to kind of unpack what my lessons learned were and to contextualize that time of my training life. But I was able to come back to the platform in 2022. So it was a 6-year break. It probably didn't need to be that long, but it was. Came back to competing in 2022. And it's not like it's been sunshine and rainbows since then. I've had a few, I don't know if they're exactly recurrences of the same injury, but they're similarly related back injuries, but I haven't had one in the last year and a half. And I would say that the thing that's helped me through this whole process, the thing that helped me start competing again in 2022, that helped me get back on to the national level in 2023. I had a kind of a recurrence in that injury 2 weeks out. And the thing that's helped me kind of put it in the rearview mirror over the last year and a half has been increasing attention paid to load management and following that rabbit hole as far as it goes, which is pretty far. And I mean, I would love to sit down and show you guys the way that I'm managing training around all this stuff. And for any other situation, you would probably be like, dude, that's way overkill. You don't need it's an attention to detail that probably borders on inventive. But every time I take it a step further, I'm rewarded with, either better injury management or better returns on my strength investments or something along those lines. So I guess that's the major lesson for me over the last period of time.
Eric, I'm going to flip this over to you. Mike, I love this, man, because I will say, I don't know if you'll agree with this, and maybe I'll ask you this question first before going over to Eric, talking about what gets more difficult over time. What are we actually looking at where people say, oh, it's harder to compete. I'm now in my 30s. What's going on? Do you feel that injury helped crystallize something within you, meaning that, as Eric said, you were someone where you had this passion from an early age, training with your brother, winning, right? So as you're applying yourself, you're getting this reward more and more, where you're winning championships, it's getting better and better. And then with this setback, it's a far different thing. And that's why we'll have Eric Trexler also on another episode, co-host of Iron Culture. He spoke about this at the end of last episode, about his motivation, about, just having more empathy overall, his injury, his evolving perspective as it relates to being a lifter. But do you feel that the injury crystallized something inside of you where it caused you to do a deep dive within yourself to assess, why am I doing this? Do I want to continue to do this? If that is off the table, kind of as you said, the theoretical part, as Eric kind of just described, and I can echo this, I have not had an injury like that at all, but just idea with, life considerations and constraints, could this be my last PR? Would I be okay with that if I never hit a PR again? And for me personally, I'll say this, that I had to accept the death of a component of myself. And once I saw that death of an element within myself, that I would be comfortable with that I accepted that outcome. That's a possibility. That is a very real door. And it's not just it could happen. And in your back of your mind, you're like, it's not going to happen. I'm going to apply myself. But just a very real acceptance. If this was it, would I be okay doing that? And once I was able to do that, I think it creates greater clarity. But there's a lot of questions within myself I had to answer. I'm just wondering, it seemed so you spoke, and I can't underscore this for people that don't have kids or other things in general. Shout out to my boy, Tico, head of marketing for Rascal. I was speaking off camera with Mike. He has 2 kids now, and I see the change that it has produced in him, his time, right? The amount of time he could dedicate. And it's no surprise, as an example, you just competed at nationals. I have the privilege of speaking with guys like Jesus Oliveros on a regular basis, Austin Perkins, guys at the top of their game. And you'll notice, Eric and Mike, that the way that they organize their schedule is one to be the most conducive in regards to their training. Austin all the time thanks his fiance, because his fiance, I met her, fantastic person. Just like when they train together, she's helping to facilitate that environment. So they're trying to control everything in their situation to produce the best possible result. Well, now we have real life considerations, Mike. And with your example, as we get older, again, like owning a house or like things, management, stress, like all these other extra layers. But let's talk about that injury just for a second, and then I want to flip it over to Eric. Did it crystallize something inside of you? Because I feel there's a difference that one must approach things when you're winning and you're getting that reward mechanism. You have a little bit of a setback, but then you kind of get back on the bicycle, so to speak. There's a difference between that and then taking an extended period of time off from hitting a PR or being at your former peak, so to speak, where you have to reconcile with different elements within yourself. So maybe just a question, because you spoke about your injury, man. What did this injury teach you maybe about yourself? And then I want to go over to Eric to ask about that whole biological question.
Man, a lot. And there's I'll try to stay focused. I started a little bit on like this load management rabbit hole as a result of that. But the thing that really set me off down this path wasn't my own injury. It was the injury of one of my athletes who I had been working with. He's a pretty high level guy, was really going places. We hadn't been working together for that long, just like a couple blocks, and his strength is going through the roof, just going up like crazy. And we had finished this block and we'd gone into a pivot. So it's like toward the end of the pivot as well. So training loads had been down, and he was doing something like some split squats. So it wasn't anything crazy, wasn't anything heavy. He had a pretty severe injury happen during that. And that really shook me, because I was like, what happened? Like, how could I have better managed this? How could I have, done better by the athlete? How could we have avoided this? And a lot of what we know comes down to load management. And so it's like, well, maybe you could have prevented it, maybe not. To some extent, the risk is inherent to the activity, right? So sometimes bad things happen and there's not much you can do about it. But I wanted to make sure that if there was something that I could have maybe done about it to lessen the risk or lessen the exposure, that I did that. And so that kind of started me down this path. And it just so happens that that was a benefit to my training as well, benefit to the training of the other athletes I've worked with. And the further we go, the better it gets. So we just kind of keep going that way. There was another thing, though, that I wanted to touch on. You were talking about kind of looking in the mirror almost and kind of coming to terms with this fact that, like, if I've done my best, I've hit my last PR, then that's something that I'm okay with. And I remember when I took that break from competition and I said, I'm not going to sign up for another one until I'm better. Maybe that happens. Maybe it never happens. But I can look in the mirror and go, you know what? I got to do some pretty cool stuff when I was powerlifting. I'm still able to coach, and and I felt good about that. And then time goes on, and I think maybe I can get back on the platform, and I do. And I come on Iron Culture. I talk about what it's like to come back to the platform, and I'm feeling really good. Maybe we can get back to some PR levels. And then it's 2 weeks out from the 2023 national championship, and I have another injury. And this isn't the first one. And I'm going, every time I feel like I'm getting back to those numbers, something happens. What if it's really it? That hit different. Like, I had accepted it at one point, but then I unaccepted it, I guess, later on. And I just want to bring that up to say that, like, these things aren't, it's not like you solve the problem and it's gone forever. It's an emotional thing, and it can come and go. And in the midst of, the emotional response to some injury is probably not the best time to be thinking about that stuff. Take your time and, process these things the same way that you would other serious life events, because it is a serious part of your life, Yeah, that was an epiphany for me in a way that's like, well, maybe this matters to me in some ways that I haven't fully processed, or my relationship to the sport has changed again, you know.
This is why we're here, man. And so I'm going to flip it over to Eric. I think a duality can exist also within us. As you said, like things change over time where you accept it and then wait a second, you have a perspective change. And I think it's almost like we have different elements within us. If you can accept that one portion where it is there, it's very real. You've had you've visualized, like, if that's it, like I'm never going to hit another PR again, but I'm still going to pursue this because I like to pursue it. It's a difference than I think every single time. It's kind of rounding off that edge of the potential disappointment that every time you have that recurring injury, which I can relate to, something that flares up, the emotional response, not like, oh God, it's really over this time, but like it just allows you to have a better perspective and just say like, hey, you know what? I'm going to do the things that I can do given these constraints. We're going to see what happens. And as the signposts, as the worm signs, so to speak, to give a Dune reference, they start looking good again, where it's like, all right, let's really rev it up. It's good to be in them. I think one of the most underrated components personally, as it relates to, I'd say strength training, because it's the body in movement, right? Actually expressing itself through lifting a weight, is that it's okay to let those emotions take over in that instance of wanting to get the PR, like whether you get it or not, or building up to it. It's great to be human and feel all those things and then do like the analysis after the fact. So I could completely relate to both accepting, then seeing some potential signs, going on that wave, and then once again doing another analysis. Eric, I want to ask you, man, just about yourself. We kind of had that conversation with Mike just now, that what changes over time? Like, what do you feel is different for you as someone who is now a lifter in their 40s versus being in your 30s versus being in your 20s? Because I think at the top level, when people will see this, they'll see the gray in the beard, or they'll see this and that. It's like, oh, it's a biological thing that's occurring with you, right? Where like you're slowing down, you can't handle the same amount of load. Like, what has changed for you as a lifter that you've noticed?
That's a good question. I think the first thing is that there's a long period of time for many lifters in there, and the biology will differ, whether it's in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, or 60s even, where maybe you start to really experience a different set of constraints that you notice regularly. But I think before that point, which is probably where Mike and I still are, it can be insidious because you have ran into some of these significant roadblocks that make you look in the mirror and question and face the proverbial death of this part of yourself, like you brought up so aptly, Omar. But then when you get into a hot streak, when things are feeling good, when you're on the comeback rise, all of a sudden you get that good feeling of like you were 21 again, or 22, or 23, or 17, or whatever you might identify with. And that is where you can potentially forget the wisdom that you've gained from going through those phases. And like Mike T was talking about, get re-traumatized by being taken down a peg and going, oh shit, man, like this false hope, it was a false dawn, like I actually am done. So I think the biggest thing is that you need to find that balance between relentless optimism and also grounding in the reality and learning from the lessons that you got before without it actually holding you back. Because you do have to push yourself to new places, regardless of your experiences and knowledge, that maybe you don't quite have the same level of resilience that you had before, that you have to be more tactical, you have to be more strategic. And I think I got two things that I want to say. One, I'll talk about my experiences and I'll try to be brief. There's been a couple of times where I've had to accept the potential death of a certain part of me as a lifter. One of them we've recounted hilariously on Iron Culture, of us joking about getting into a fight in Toronto with a guy and me saying, well, Omar, to be honest right now, I have multiple herniated discs in my neck. I have a surgery scheduled in July that I don't know if I'm going to get or not. And I'm down to fight, but I'm also going to stop the fight because I'm going to get dropped paralyzed and it'll get real serious real fast, but at least I'll have saved my friend Omar. Within 3 weeks of that scheduled surgery, my neck had resolved itself. And that surgery that I was facing in 2018 or 2019, I can't remember quite, I think it was 2018, would have been them going through the front of my neck and actually putting like a cage around one of my vertebrae, and it was a significant potential surgery I was going to get, but I was in constant pain and I had radiopathy going down my arm, and it happened so randomly. I was doing bodybuilding overhead pressing and just felt a little off. There was no acute injury, and then literally the next day, on one arm, I'm sitting there rowing 50 kilos, 111 pounds for high reps, dumbbell rows. I switch the other arm and I can't move it off the ground, and I end up being only able to row 40 pounds. So serious nerve compression. And then I had to ask Barb to drive most of the time because I'd get uncomfortable, and my right arm would go numb, and I had to sit in this seat next to her and put my arm up behind her. And that went on for months and months and months. And then I just healed, and it was fine. And not only that, but I actually ended up having a return arc to Olympic weightlifting. And at that time, I had basically said, all right, well, I've now given up both powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting and strongman because of the limitations that neck injury put upon me. I'm a bodybuilder. Like, I can work around this. I'm doing BFR. I was doing electrostim, and I was considering, surgery just to be able to train in a very limited capacity to what I had before. And I thought, so overhead work is done for me. So looking in the mirror and accepting that and thinking about that someone's going to literally cut holes in my neck and put a cage around my one of my discs and resect some disc material and do all this stuff, and then it just resolved itself. That was one of those kind of getting really close to the flame, but it wasn't the first time. I opted for what I described as elective powerlifting surgery in 2017 for my hips. I got bilateral FAI surgery, which was a pretty big deal, and it had a relatively long recovery arc. And when you look at the literature, it wasn't quite a 50-50 roll of the dice of it getting better, but I had already spent since 2013 stagnant in my squat, hanging around just under 500 pounds and not being able to bring up my deadlift, my sumo deadlifts either. And just deciding eventually I was fed up with it, and nothing else worked. I'd done physio, I'd done everything you can imagine.
Did you try walking it off?
And I went under the knife. I did try walking it off. I even just decided not to get water to be less of a bitch. So unfortunately, my JV high school football coaches did not provide the necessary wisdom that carried on later. So I ended up getting surgery, and I actually squatted 500 pounds, and I had a sense of satisfaction. That happened outside of competition because nationals got canceled due to COVID. And because I had both given up on Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting twice because of this, and saying, I'm just not going to be able to do this anymore. And it's painful to try to do it, and it's not worth it. I'm just going to have to bodybuild or just do what I can, or bench only or something like that. I was able to reach a sense of completeness that surprised me. So when I had my second run at Olympic weightlifting, because I was like, I've got unfinished business, let me see if I can total more. I actually didn't total more. I improved my technique, but I just didn't hit the same top that I did in my late 20s and my late 30s, which is unsurprising when you think about weightlifting being a little more of a power-based sport, and the fact that my mobility, which was already subpar for weightlifting, got embarrassingly subpar. But I didn't have a sense of loss. I didn't have a big hit to my ego. I didn't feel like something had died inside or a failure. Like I had attempted something and not got it because I was already on the other side of it. And then when I faced it again, from the first time to the second time, I didn't need to squat 500 pounds in competition. I would still like to do that, but I know that I have a sense of satisfaction there. And I don't have kids. And I don't pretend to think that I don't have, in some ways, a very privileged life where I own my own businesses, I set my own schedule, and I can train when I want and the amount that I want. But I'm also operating under a fair amount of constraints. Like I said, no kids, but I do have a fiduciary responsibility to the investors in Helm stock. My shareholders are expecting returns. No, but in all seriousness, what that means is like I'm a partner in multiple businesses, and people rely on me. And in some cases, I am the dominant face for a group that is doing a lot of work, and I need to be out there. I need to be dedicating time. I have sometimes as many as 10 students who have moved their lives and put themselves into a financially precarious position to pursue also something quite uncertain, whether they can complete a PhD in a foreign country, sometimes learning a second language. And I'm their first initial lifeline and their mentor. I can't not be available to them because I want to spend another 5 hours training. So there's a great paraphrased quote that Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about when he was discussing the Apollo program. And he said, like, sometimes we think that it's just an issue of we need more time and we need more money. But realistically, the one way we could have ensured that none of the space program launches would have got off the ground is if you took a group of engineers and you gave them unlimited money and unlimited time. Because you would just keep, it's almost the paralysis by analysis. You can keep theorizing about what to do. And the true thing is that we don't make any decisions without understanding somewhere where the lines are to color within them. And so, for example, I've been talking a lot about antagonist paired sets lately. I was on the RP channel going through my upper body session and how I did an entire upper body workout of antagonist paired sets and then finishing with either drop sets or rest pause. And there was a lot of questions about volume and whether that's compromising things and what are certain pairings and does that drop the absolute load? And interestingly enough, the data is actually quite favorable for antagonist paired sets because you actually get longer rest peripherally, even though it requires better cardiovascular shape. Because if you do bench, rest 3 minutes and do bench, or if you do bench, row, rest 3 minutes, you're actually getting a little more rest for your pec musculature. But anyway, people have been asking me that, and what they might be missing is that I am choosing to do that because I can get the amount of volume necessary for me to progress as a bodybuilder done in about 75% of the time. And that makes a big difference to me. I'm doing an amount of work that if I had approached it in my 20s, when I had even less responsibilities, and I was getting, income from the GI Bill as an ex-Air Force person and doing part-time personal training, I would be training probably 10 hours a week instead of 6 to 7 hours a week like I am currently. And whatever sacrifice I'm getting from getting it done in that time period is an absolute necessity. And the constraints that I started with did shift a little bit. Once I realized, there's more to be squeezed out in terms of my placing and my objective outcomes competitively as a bodybuilder, I sat down with the team, 3MJ Squad, Brian Miner, and I was like, all right, for the goal of me taking my bodybuilding career as far as I can, but still acknowledging the life constraints and values I have as Eric, what do we need to do? So that's a goalpost shift to some degree of what I'm willing to do. Like if we'd started with a different set of precepts, like, hey, to maintain this peak level of overall, physical culturist, strength and performance, I want to have still a good overhead press, and my big three, I want it to total over 600, and I want to be able to do some snatches and maybe do some strongman work and also be muscular. With the time I have and these goals, what will we do? But I'm not interested in competing. Different outcome. But when I say, listen, I want to try to place top 5 at Worlds, realistically, what do we need to do? And that is like turn over pretty much every stone I have left. Okay, then how do we do that while you're still Eric Helms? So that's actually how you solve problems. It's not a barrier. And I think when in my 20s or my 30s, I would have seen that as a barrier or suboptimal. But I was just simply not acknowledging that there's always constraints you need to work within. And when you don't acknowledge them, you actually end up being less efficient and you expose yourself to potential negative sideways outcomes because you're not acknowledging the other demands of life and you're being a little too singular in your focus. So I think, to answer your question, Omar, the biology is not the limiting factor until it is. And you sometimes forget that when the going is good. So you want to retain that wisdom. And then the important thing for people who are not here yet or who are just newly dealing with this is that we're always dealing with constraints, and the way that efficient, effective, sustainable training that will get you to where you need to go occurs is by starting with the constraints and then going from there, no matter what they are.
Eric, well said. I think it is something to be noted within youth that we like testing boundaries. So, we need to see what we're capable of or where that boundary is. And once we get done with testing the boundary, being rewarded, getting ourselves licked a little bit, it was like, oh, wait a second, like my shoulder's feeling a little angry now, or my back. Let's take on a different approach. I think if we could bring the wisdom that we gained after all these years that we've accrued back then, what a dominant physical monster that we would have. But Mike, let's go back to this. So it's not, I don't want to frame this incorrectly. So Mike, triumphant return, a real return to powerlifting, damn near podiums, is competing with the big dogs of the next generation. As Eric said, there's hundreds of thousands more people lifting. So it truly, it cannot be understated how, the quality of lifter has increased over the last decade, but Mike is still here doing the damn thing. And it's not like, hey, Mike, you did fantastic. Now everything you did, now it's worth it. Let's have you on a talk. But I think it's kind of, it's a data point, right, of something that you did. It's like, so how did that occur? How do you feel about it? And then maybe the question I wanted to ask is, how does this event change the future for you? So before you're dealing with, and I think as humans, it's just very tough to deal with a lot of uncertainty, right? So we talk about like, coaching yourself, like doing a self-audit, assessing how you feel, accepting components of yourself that you may or may not, reach certain levels again. Then you get on a hot streak, you get a setback. So there's a lot of uncertainty one is dealing with for years and years and years. And you're not getting that, not that one needs it, that external reward mechanism where I did the damn thing. When it comes to, kind of powerlifting, you hope to lift a certain number. But you just came off a fantastic, what can only be described as a fantastic meet. So it feels as if potentially more doors have opened up. You're now doing an equipped powerlifting meet in 3 weeks. What did 2024 Powerlifting America Nationals change for you? So you had this event that occurred. Things kind of came together, they coalesced. What's changed? How is your perspective now differed? Like, just talk us through what has occurred and then what you're looking at now in the future. Does the horizon change a little bit? Do you see a little further now, Mike, when you look at the horizon?
Maybe it did feel like a win to me, like a personal win that, totaling 900, it was the first time I'd totaled that since 2014, I think. So it's 10 years, man, 10 years. And it caused me to, I wasn't joking about not being super familiar with my own numbers, even as crazy as that might sound. But in the prep for this competition, I realized, oh yeah, the weight class has changed about midway through my career. My best total at 120 kilos is actually 916 and a half. So I'm only 16 and a half kilos away from an all-time personal best at that weight. And that feels really motivating too. So I talked to some of the people on my team before deciding to do this little foray into equipped lifting, which, look, it may be a little foray, it may be a medium-sized foray, we don't know. But it does feel like, I could be close to that, hitting a real lifetime personal best, which would be really, really cool, right? But again, it's important for me to just kind of acknowledge to myself, I don't know what the future brings. You are talking about being on a hot streak, and I remember very specifically last summer training for a competition and being on one of these hot streaks where every week, for me in particular, it was the deadlift. And it's every week when I go in to deadlift, I was just destroying weights that, I'm going to have to take a big jump next week. So hopefully I can put a challenging weight on the bar, right? And then just destroy that one too. And every week for this entire block or even 2 blocks, it was like that. And I remember driving home from the gym and thinking this is the best part right here. It's not even the achievement of the goal, but it's that you're gaining on it, and you're doing it in this very tangible way. I remember thinking about that and noticing it and really savoring it in that moment. And that's something that I would not have had the wisdom to do, did not have the wisdom to do in the first half of my powerlifting career. It was very outcome oriented. If you guys haven't had the chance to talk to Steve Magnus, I would be interested in listening to that episode. I know he's primarily a running coach, but I think he would have a lot of interesting things to say. He recently had a post about what does it mean to be process oriented, and that really resonated a lot with me. This idea of like, well, you have a goal, yeah, but then you kind of put the goal aside, and like the goal might be for me to hit this lifetime PR, but now let's put that aside and focus on the next actions that need to happen, and savor them when they are happening.
Like this is why these insights can only be divined by someone who goes through this experience. I just want to echo one thing and then move on though with this conversation, because we're dropping gems here, folks. It's a monster episode. Some of my most enjoyable lifting sessions of the last year were those garage sessions where maybe it's in the evening, lights are off, I'm just vibing with it. In that session, within the session, I know what I have to do and I perform at my expectation or maybe sometimes higher. And that feeling of just being either on or being in the moment, experiencing the lifting, the moods that come with it, is the reward in and of itself. And then there is something far off, like, yeah, I know, I got to hit like that all-time PR. It's like down the road. But I think that almost robs you of enjoying that moment. And I kind of feel once you start blocking it up like that, the mindset just slowly changes where you realize that everything has its own block of time. So even if you get to that point, like to your, what you just alluded to, Mike, where you're 2 weeks out, everything to that point in time has been fantastic. Oops, another injury setback. Well, if you only focus on that end outcome, I'm about to compete, I need to get that in order for all of these things to be justified and worth it, well, then it frames everything differently. And I think it's just a very underrated component, because coming into those sessions and being able to experience it with an openness of mind and kind of that emotional availability, just to process everything that you're feeling. If it's a bad workout, it's a good workout, and then so on and so forth, has been one of the greatest, I'd say, rewards anyways of the last few years. I want to hear, go ahead.
Sorry to inject one other idea. I think, Eric, I remember talking to you about this quite a few years ago now, but I used to watch videos that Dave Tate would post of his own training. And this was like long after his competitive season of his life. And he was doing, he would make fun of himself about like the kind of stuff that he was doing. It was like high box, spider bar with all these chains and stuff like that. But like having talked to him about it, I know like what he wants to, the feeling of lifting something heavy. And I would watch his videos, and something about it really resonated with me. And it took me a long time to figure out what that was. And it's that one of the things that I find valuable in this experience is approaching a weight that kind of scares me a little bit, but then you do it anyway. And it's the relief, the accomplishment on the other side of, facing that little fear. It's not, there is a real component to it, but, it's not anything actually dangerous, but facing a little bit of that and not totally giving into it, that is valuable in itself. And I think seeing that in others is something that it helped me kind of frame some of my own motivations.
Eric.
It's why I've never pulled out of a prep. I've started preps in 07, 09, 2011, 2019, and 2023, and I completed them all. And it's almost like the extended version of that, because there's a part of me that's afraid of being the procrastinator, being the person who doesn't finish things, being the guy who finds a way out. But I want to I want to put myself out there and potentially be like, yeah, I was worse, and risk that, because it takes a level of courage to risk it. And I want to be someone who is courageous. It's because I know I have a scared, like not trying as hard type of lazy version of me in there. And I want to be intentional with not choosing to be that person, even if it means going, yeah, actually you were a little bit worse this season. And like objectively, I think 2011, I wasn't as good as in 2009. And I was definitely better in 2019. When I look at the level of conditioning I hit, I just happened to win a show and pieced out, I had gone with a low volume phase of training, and I lost a little bit of size in my upper body. I learned from that experience, and it was a good thing. And that was my whole foray into bodybuilding and lifting in general and sticking with it. Was I told myself, you're going to stick with this and see how far you can take it, period. Because everything else you've done, whether it is, this is a 21-year-old talking to himself, so like I hadn't done that much, but you conceive yourself how you are no matter what your maturity level is at the time. I wanted to change that story arc. I wanted to have more control over who I was. And a big personal philosophy I have is that who you are as a person is primarily based upon your choices and responses you make to situations, not your knee-jerk response. Because then we don't acknowledge, then we see being a good or bad person as this static thing, and then it's a very hopeless, scary reality, in my opinion. The idea that there is no redemption, there's no ability to change, or you can't notice things about yourself that you're not happy about, you're not proud of, and go, well, you know what? Like, what am I going to do about it? Just am I just going to give in to these shitty impulses I have and be the lazy person or be an asshole or be a bully? Or do I want to try to be a better person and try to figure out why am I that way and find a way to move forward and reprogram myself? It's an empowering kind of philosophy that I at least pretend to be true so that I can get through the day, right? But no, I get that 100%, and that is the same type of reason why I love powerlifting in a different way, but I get something different out of bodybuilding because you have to make that decision for months. I think I'm not looking as good as last time, and which, by the way, you think that no matter what during a prep, because there's always that phase where you're either in the teens for body fat percentage and you're just looking flat, it's too early, so you think you're losing muscle, or later where you never think you're lean enough and you're not going to be ready on time, and then when you do push harder, you feel like, okay, I'm going to be lean, but I'm going to be small, and you get nervous. It's like those emotions extend for months. But the microcosm in a lifting session, it's like, oh shit. Last week, 530 was a 9.5 RPE, and I'm supposed to attempt 550 right now, but my warm-ups move slower. We're gonna do it. We're just gonna do it. We're gonna see what happens. We're gonna get to the right mindset, the right mentality. I've got spotters. Maybe I die, maybe I don't, but we're gonna go for it. And obviously that's hyperbolic, but those are some of the experiences in the moment which I think make it very rewarding. And so I totally relate to Dave Tate in that as well. And I think that the benefits to that are independent of what weight is on the bar, right? Or what that eventual outcome is. It is pushing yourself to a place where there's potential for failure because there's also therefore potential for success, surprising yourself and redefining your self-efficacy. But there's risk because it can also degrade your self-efficacy. You can be the guy who gets hurt 2 weeks out from nationals after already being hurt and potentially being re-traumatized and being even worse off. And I think that's something we should talk about, is that there is survivorship bias here, and there is maybe a reality where I needed neck surgery and, you never came back from your injury. So, but that's why it matters. That's why it can be so good. And and what are you going to do? Not lift? I think that's kind of like eventually where you get. I know a lot of lifters identify with Stoic philosophy, and I know you do, Mike. If anyone, I'm not going to out your personal stuff, but if anyone that knows the names of some of your kids, they'll get how much that is close to you. I got there reading actually Miyamoto Musashi's 5 Rings, which is actually Japanese philosophy, and he talks about meditating on death, being torn apart by arrows or cut in half, and the mentality he would go into multiple duels to the death. This is I think if I recall correctly, a 16th century swordsman, samurai. And just the idea of going like, yep, I could die. And I think that's almost always true, but being very comfortable with the worst case scenario and deciding that it's worth it anyway, I think is where really good personal growth can come from. And there's parallels for that in almost every aspect of life. And and I think it's interesting that that's cross-cultural. So big tangent, big aside, but basically saying I agree with Mike.
Yeah, it's always a risk in conversations like this to, I guess, blow it out of proportion. That we can always come back to the fact that, hey guys, we're talking about lifting weights a little bit.
Yes,
but these things do apply, and it is like smaller applications of principles that do apply in other domains as well. And I mean, just because you're doing a small practice doesn't mean that it's not still a practice. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, I'm fine with that, and to spend a little time taking this thing that is important to you for whatever reason, and thinking about, like, what's the exit going to be like, and how am I going to cope with that? Like, that's a reasonable thing to do to me, and it doesn't necessarily need to be connected to anything super grand, but it kind of is, in a way, that there are enough of us that see connections through whatever parts of our life. And it's not that there's anything super special about lifting weights. It could be any sort of disciplined practice. To see a connection between that and how you live other parts of your life. Lots of us have seen those connections, and whether that's survivorship bias or not, I've thought about that a lot over the years, and I've even tried to run some pseudo experiments to see if I could gain some insight on it. And my personal conviction on it is that it's not just survivorship bias. There's, maybe part of that, but I do very strongly believe in personal growth being a thing. I was having a conversation with somebody like last week, and we were talking about the oft quoted whatever conversational topic of, like, do you think people can change? And I kind of think it's a silly question. Like, obviously, like, if you spend more than 15 minutes thinking about it, or just open your eyes and look around for a little bit, obviously people change all the time. And can you direct some of it? Of course you can. Does that mean that you have complete authorship on who you are as a person? Well, obviously not. But you do have some agency here. And the way that you would express that agency is, like you're saying, through the choices that you make. And why wouldn't the choices that you make in one area of your identity have some effect on all the other areas of your identity too?
The penlight. We have the penlight.
Yep.
The penlight exists. We're in it. We're in a cave. It's ever changing. The batteries might go out, but right now we've got a penlight.
It's crazy. Mike would be okay with that. And so we're okay. We're actually just behind Mike in the cave, man. Like, go get it, Mike. It's like, you got this. We're with you right there. But no, it warms, as Eric would say, the cookies in our soul to have these conversations, because, Mike, you're a lifter's lifter. And I'll speak for myself when I say that I find you inspirational, getting back on that platform. And it's fantastic watching that live stream, that celebration you had on your deadlift, lifting over 800 pounds, man, because I do think, and personally, I'll just say this real quick, that I identify with is that, lifting a weight in that moment, being a chaser of that cocaine high, okay, that adrenaline rush, in that moment when you have to try and pursue that and you're about to do the lift, all the things are going through your head, and then it all comes together to one moment, the uncertainty, like the multitude of possibilities of what can happen, and then the outcome, right? You check out if the cat is alive or dead at the end, and to be alive and to experience that in a heightened state, and to come back after all those years. So just to see it, I think we all, like Eric, to see, like, these stories of people either coming back in quotations or really showing what they're capable of. I'd say what we've always known is within the character quality of yourself expressed in a physical form. I want to give a shout out actually to my boy, Walter Curiazzo, who is my age now. So he's going to represent Canada now in the 105 kg class. He's done that several times before. He's done it over a decade ago. He placed 4th in 2018 in Canada Worlds, but he's now doing this well over a decade later. Very tight class. People begin strong over time. But guess what? Walter gets even stronger. We love to see these stories. You don't only need to have the stone. I think what I really appreciated, what you just said, Mike, and what we've been having in this conversation, Eric. At the end of the day, it's just lifting, and we all know this is something that we're very passionate about. I do like how you said things blend into one another. Like, life in and of itself is kind of inherently chaotic, meaning that we can't discern the patterns. It seems kind of random, the events that will occur to us. And there's an element of entropy where like there's a degradation over time of many different things, like bodily functions, you go down different places, but it's nice to be able to control enough of the variables within a certain silo to say, hey, I'm going to try and make progress in this. What can I learn from this? What can I learn about myself? And then most importantly, what both of you guys do, share it back with the rest of the community where there's that communal element. So let me just hit everyone with something before I give it over to Mike, maybe for some final words, man. We're all in this cave together. And if enough of us have a penlight, you know what happens? We have one flashlight. And you know what happens when you have one flashlight? You have a 2% possibility of getting the hell out that cave.
We got to get out of this cave, man.
We're going to get out of it. Mike, but then Mike's going to see, I just know how Mike's going to be thinking. He's saying, but do we even need to leave this cave? What if this cave is where we make our refuge? And what if we make this place, yeah, just a home. But Mike, man, it's been fantastic. I want to give you the final thoughts on this episode. Anything you want to either come back to, something you feel you didn't cover, anything, man.
Man, I just really appreciate you guys it's good to go back and forth with you on these topics. That I think this is an area that lots of people have thoughts around, and it's fun for me to get to explore those. And it's a big part of like me making sense of my own experiences. So selfishly, thank you guys for that. And I think you guys do awesome work.
Eric,
I appreciate that, man. One thing I would like you to also talk about briefly, Mike, just because we've talked philosophically, which is great. And I think we've brought people into the circle. We've motivated them. We've excited them. They've become endeared to you. And now I have a feeling they'll want to actually follow your journey. So you were alluding to, I didn't say what you thought I'd say. You alluded to like, hey, I didn't qualify for certain things. I know you were probably thinking about North Americans, and now you're looking at potentially doing open worlds. That's kind of the target. So talk to us about what is the pathway for you to qualify for open worlds, and then where's that going to be? When do you plan to compete there? What is the ideal game plan right now for Mike T as the athlete?
Sure. So mention I put equipment on about a month ago. It's been the first time since 2010, so 14 years since I competed equipped. And I'm getting ready for nationals. It's in about 3 weeks. If I do well, and I mean really well, then I can qualify for the U.S. national team and go to Worlds. The qualification total to get an automatic spot is 1050 for my weight class, based on recent world performances. To put that in context, my best ever in equipment is 1062.5. So it's a really good total, right? We'll see. Who knows? I hope I can get to it. If I can't, then there's still the alternate list. But if I can qualify for the U.S. national team, then I would go to the World Championships in Iceland in November. That buys me quite a bit more time. And this feels wrong to even mention, considering I've only been back in equipment for about a month. But if you go to Iceland and do very well, it is a World Games qualifying year. So, I mean, in terms of stories, that would be a pretty cool one. It's also a thing that I am not thinking about too much right now, because I've got it's like there's some boxes that need to be checked first. But it's worth mentioning.
Hey, you're putting it out there in the universe. I respect that, and you're doing the work. And I think regardless of what happens, I think it's exciting to see you do that. And the fact that we don't know if you're going to get there makes it all the better, based upon all the philosophical concepts we talked about. So I personally am going to be on the edge of my seat. I love to see it. I love to hear about it, and I really hope that everyone else also takes some time to watch and follow along, and that you share as much as you're comfortable in that journey, because I think it's something that a lot of people would take inspiration from.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Eric, well said, man. And thank you also, Eric, for your own insights. Like, just this whole conversation has been a nice full circle moment where we had you, like we said, it was like episode 4, so it's 5 years ago. A lot has changed, people change, they gain a piece and they lose one too. It's lovely to see the evolution of Mike T. The best is yet to come. You heard it here first, folks, but I just want to thank you, Mike, for being on. Kyle will, of course, link your social media down below for people to follow along. I want to thank every single person for listening to another episode of Iron Culture. You could go ahead and leave a rating and a review. 5 stars is typically what people give. We have learned recently that sometimes, despite it being a 5-star review, if there's anything that's not interpreted as being overwhelmingly positive, it might cause another existential crisis within the Iron Culture throuple, and we'll leave it at that. But go ahead and leave a rating review. We're back every single insert date here from now until the end of time. We'll catch you in that next episode. Until next time.